Matthieu and I have been friends for some time, and it's really been such a joy to be friends with him because he is an extraordinary individual. As many of you may know, he began life initially getting a PhD in, I think, molecular genetics at the Louis Pasteur Institute. And when he got his PhD, he ultimately went to India and spent some time with some of the Tibetan masters, and that changed the direction of his life ultimately. Don't leave! And from then, he has spent the last 30 years being a Tibetan monk, and a lot of that time was actually in retreat with himself. No newspapers, no electronics.
With all beings.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe with everyone. Maybe that's a better way. But ultimately, it's led to an extraordinary life, studying with many of the leading Tibetan masters, doing humanitarian work, running a monastery, and also being an incredible human being, as well as an incredible photographer. And as you can see from his latest book on altruism, an extraordinary writer. Many of you probably have all seen his book, Happiness, I think it's Life's Most Important Skill.
Something like that.
Something like that. But it's a wonderful book as well. So tonight we're going to start with Matthieu saying a few words, showing some slides. Then we're going to have a conversation, and then we'll have some question and answers if that's okay with you guys. Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Jim. It was a pleasure to be back together. I've seen many friends here. I'm so happy. So, I'm going to try to, I did the same presentation in 5 minutes and in 6 hours. I did 6 hours recently in Sao Paulo. The 5 minutes was not really a success, I must say. So I'm going to try a short one so that we have time to converse. But I thought instead of speaking about the book, accompanying that with images will make a better, stronger case. So first of all, we are often in this situation, sort of being a little bit on the brink or the edge of something. It could be in our personal life. Our mind can be our best friend or worst enemy, and we have to deal with the mind from morning till evening. So that could be quite challenging. Mind-made suffering could be remedied by mind-made sort of way of doing things, but it is a challenge. Then there's also a kind of challenge that we might find ourselves in poverty in the midst of plenty. So if you think, and then there is different kinds of challenges, in social life. The idea that if we are the most powerful country with the richest country and everyone is miserable, what's the point? Then we have a new challenge that we didn't expect. Because 10,000 years ago, there was 5 million human beings on Earth. So whatever they could do, it didn't impact much. Of course, now with the industrial, scientific, technological revolution, we multiply 1,000-fold our capacity to act on the world. We were taken by surprise because no one individually woke up in the morning thinking, I'm going to ransack the planet, so we don't feel individually responsible. Plus, the change is sort of difficult to perceive. If CO2 was pink and the sky will become pinker every day, we'll be a little bit more worried. Plus, evolution equipped us with kind of emotion to react to immediate danger. If I tell you there's a rhinoceros coming full speed in the room, everyone runs. If I say there will be a rhinoceros in 30 years, people say, we'll see, okay? So, now, if you have environmentalists speaking with economists, there's a schizophrenic dialogue. Why? Because people are working on this 3 time scale. There's the fast pace of the economy. No matter what you say, if it's not the super fast, high-speed trading, it is still the end of the month, the end of the year, balance sheet. 5 years, 10 years become very abstract. 100 years is out of their focus. So when the environmentalists tell them of something that happened in 60 years, they say, no, that's fine, but I'm an economist. So then people who make policies for the quality of social life, of social justice, they are working with life satisfaction over a lifetime, a generation. So it's very hard for them, even the mean to bring a better world, to have a common platform to do so. So I thought, after many years of meeting wonderful people from all walks of life, that there must be a concept that helps us achieving that. And the only one that I found is not me, for once. So I found that the most simple, pragmatic concept is having more consideration for others. If you have more consideration for others, you will go for a caring economics. That means a kind of economy that can address poverty in the midst of plenty, that can address the question of the common goods, the quality of the air, of the ocean, of the environment, the fight for freedom, and so forth. Which the Homo economicus, which by definition is just maximizing personal preferences, cannot do. If you have more consideration for others, you will make sure that in social life, in society, there is a possibility for everyone to flourish, to access to education, to fulfill their potential in life, and some kind of life satisfaction moment after moment, but also looking over a 10, 20 years period. And if you have more consideration for others, naturally, you will mind the fate of future generations. You know, I'm a Marxist, but don't worry, not the Karl tendency, Groucho. I love Groucho Marx. He said, why should I care for future generations? What did they do for me? I heard the serious version of Groucho on Fox News of someone who was saying, one of those billionaires, saying, I'm nothing against billionaires, but that one particular, the strange idea he was saying about the raise of the ocean, I find absurd to change my behavior now for something which will happen in 100 years. So, however complex the question of the environment is politically, scientifically, economically, in the end, it is a question of altruism versus selfishness. I guess unless there's a 5 years old here, there's someone, I hope you will be there in 100 years, my dear girl. But most of us won't be there. So if we don't care, no problem with the environment. So we are some kind of at the edge here. So what does this edge translate in scientific terms? It's what scientists call the planetary boundaries. And we could continue to be in the Holocene, this 12,000 years of exceptional climate stability, provided we keep those factors within the limit of safety. Another 50,000 years. So in 1900, we were well within those limits. I mean, you can see all those factors. The 15 minutes talk doesn't allow me to go in details. But in 1950 came the great acceleration. We entered the Anthropocene, the age where human beings had a major impact. Hold your breath, not too long, enough to imagine the next slide. Here we are. Now, to give you one idea, loss of biodiversity at the current speed of disappearance of species, in 2050, we will have lost 30% of all species on Earth. This is the 6th major extinction since life appeared on Earth, after the 5th one being that of the dinosaur. And it's not going to stop, of course, in 2050. So what can we do? Well, do like me, sitting in front of glacier, watching them melting since 50 years. But could we do something a little bit better? And why can't we care? So first of all, it seems again that altruism is no more a luxury, a kind of noble, naive utopia. You know, that is good when everything goes well, that is kind of good ideal you teach to Boy Scouts. It is the most pragmatic answer to allow all these people to reunite or reconcile those 3 time scales. There's no other concept that can help us working together, economists, social workers, politicians, environmentalists, to achieve a better world. So now, if that may not happen, what will be the obstacle? Is it because we are so selfish to the core? Of course, I don't believe a moment of that, but some people did believe that. Hobbes, many other philosophers. And by the way, wolves are quite nice social animals. Nothing wrong with those poor guys. So the idea is not, of course, we know that some people can be immensely cruel to others. But if every person is cruel to every other one, that's absolutely an ideology of the wicked world syndrome. There's not a shred of scientific evidence showing that universal selfishness is deep in human nature. And you just have to see the potential in so many people for goodness, the banality of goodness that is so often present in our life and that we ignore. Because if we, all of us here, are nicely sitting together and nobody fights, nobody will say, that's fabulous, nobody fights throughout this evening. But if one of you go rob a bank, you will be in the news for sure. So is it because, as Sigmund Freud said, I've discovered very little good in humans, from what I know most of them are rascals. So good start in life, isn't it? But are they all of them like that? Not at all. People find a great joy to cooperate. That's one of the most joyful activities, to do things together. In Nepal and Bhutan, where I live, that's what happens when you build your house. Everybody comes, we celebrate. Not only human beings do so. No Photoshop, it's the real thing. Now, there's, of course, the struggle for life, the survival of the fittest, the selfish gene. So now, if you look at recent work in evolution, and I was so relieved when I heard E.O. Wilson at 82 say I'd made a big mistake about the inclusive fitness and the selfish gene. I was wrong. And the work with Martin Novak, super cooperators, they say that now, that of course competition exists. Who will deny that? But if you read Darwin, he speaks so much more of cooperation. And they think now that cooperation has been so much more creative throughout evolution to move from one step of complexity to the next. So it is a much more powerful, going from one cell to pluricellular, to symbiosis, to all the interdependence of life. So, and if you look at human activities, the most rewarding are around quality of human relationship, and not only in humans. If we got there, it's because this is millions of years of evolution that somehow brought us to that. And look at those wonderful 100-year-old grandmothers. There's a 5 hotspots for centenaries in the world, including one in California, by the way. So that one in Japan, when it was studied, a movie called Happy, that's very nice, it shows them. They found that the main reason from their perspective, and also those who studied that they live together at birth, throughout life, until death, nobody is left alone. And that's what they mean for that. So now, what's left of the universal selfishness hypothesis? Well, there are smart people who always try to find a selfish explanation for nice behavior. They will tell you, if someone makes a wonderful act of generosity anonymously to save 100 children, doesn't say to anybody, so nobody's expecting reward, gratitude, praise, being renowned as an extraordinary philanthropist, but they will confide to a friend, I felt so good doing that. So those guys come and say, hey, you did that for the warm glow, not because you really want to care for others, but because you feel good about it. So now look at that. Don't worry. There's plenty of cases like that. So, you think those guys thought, I'm going to feel so good when this is over. But that's not the end of it. Then comes the smart psychologists believing in universal selfishness. And those guys are being interviewed and they said, how could I let that person die? I had no choice, I had to jump. No choice? Aha, automatic behavior. It's neither selfish nor altruistic, it's automatic behavior. So what is it? No, of course there's a choice, but that choice doesn't take hours. It's like instant. It's so obvious that you don't wait. Look at this guy. Is he going to deliberate for an hour? I'm going to stretch my hand, not stretch my hand? If I break his little finger, the insurance company might sue me or something like that. It does it, of course. And then there is a choice. Sorry, I don't have the next slide. I don't know what happened. People had a choice. Here are Andre Trogme, a pastor with his wife. They saved 3,500 Jewish persons during the Second World War, helped them to go to Switzerland. They were under constant threat for 4 years by the Gestapo, by the Vichy government. For themselves, for their family, for the whole village, they never made a single concession. They never closed their doors. So that's not about the warm glow. They didn't care how they feel good about it. They didn't know those people. They didn't expect anything in reward. So it would be hardly to find a selfish explanation. And people like Daniel Batson, psychologist, for 20 years, he devised 30 types of different experimental situations to show that the empathic concern hypothesis was valid, and any kind of selfish explanation, he could find a way to show that in many situations, people will still behave in an altruistic way. So that's good news. We have empathy. We can, this is a Chinese person who has lost his leg. When he was 5 years old, he spent his life helping others. And we in Tibet, for instance, helped this woman who had TB. I don't know why there's a blue slide here. Sorry for that. And then, of course, we may find a strong empathy for people. But empathy alone is not enough. Now, if you keep on looking at that, if you keep on being with people who suffer and you resonate emotionally with their suffering, and that's all you have at your disposal, you will end up in burnout, empathic distress, overwhelming. So empathy is very useful to tell you what is the situation of another. Of course, empathy could be with joy also. But if the only thing you have is like an electric pump, without water, it burns. And we studied with that with Tanya Singer, and she could show that there's no such thing as compassion fatigue. There's empathy fatigue. And if you bring compassion in the picture, first, it's a different network in the brain, and second, compassion and loving kindness, and I don't have time to go in details, but it turns out to be the antidote to empathic distress, and it works wonderfully. So when you know that 60% of all medical personnel in the United States are or will suffer or burnout at some point, you see why it will be so wonderful to have this training in the medical world. So now the two questions are, if we are altruistic, if we have that potential, can we enhance it individually and so in the society? So individually, I think first of all, thousands of years of contemplative practice at the individual level, for those who have gone through that, they know in their lives that it is possible. But that's not enough if a monk comes from the Himalayas and tells you that. I think in our world, the validation of science is very precious. That's why the disciple of those great masters like Kangyu Rinpoche and Khyentse Rinpoche and of His Holiness the Dalai Lama went to the lab, lent themselves as guinea pigs in a way to do a study of what are the effects on the brain of mind training in compassion and loving kindness. So you have great meditators like Chogyal Rinpoche. You need control group with bad meditators like this one. And so Rishi is here, Rishi Davidson is happy not because there was wonderful result, but because I survived 2.5 hours in MRI machine. But the results were fascinating with these long-term meditators. If you see novices trying to meditate on compassion, at rest nothing happened, in meditation nothing happened, while the long-term meditators at rest, they rest. When they engage in compassion meditation, there's a huge activation in the gamma frequency in some areas of the brain. If you look at brain imagery, at rest also nothing happened. When they engage in compassion, a lot of areas are activated, connected with affiliation, with parental love, with empathy, with positive affect. Novices, nothing happened at rest, nothing happened in meditation. That's normal, they didn't train. You might say, well, that's good for you, $60,000 of meditation, what about us? So the answer is, it does work, even after 4 weeks, 20 minutes a day. And not only that, this is with mindfulness, but you could see a structural change in the hippocampus, that's an area of the brain that assimilate novelty. So then you could also see after 2 weeks only, 20 minutes a day, that's someone at Rishi Davidson's lab who did that, Ellen Wang, that you increase the prosocial behavior. And it's also related with the decrease in the brain, even it is small, but it is significant, of the size of the amygdala that has to do with fear and anger and this kind of fight or flight emotions. So this shows that as moment you start a regular training, there is structural and functional change. Now, can we do that even with children? When here are 4 or 5 years old, again in Madison, doing a 10 weeks program, 40 minutes, 3 times a week, with mindfulness of breathing, but more than anything else, different kinds of enhancing pro-social behavior, gratitude, cooperative activities, and so forth and so forth. And you see that even with those kids, it's almost like playing around with those trainings. There's a significant increase in pro-social behavior. But we need the ultimate test. And here comes the stickers test. So what you do, the scientists determine for each child in the class who is their best friend, with their least favorite child, and then they have another envelopes with the unknown child and the sick child. And they have to give stickers away. So as you can guess, before the intervention, they give everything to their best friend. No mystery. What could happen after 10 weeks? It's just like almost playing around. It's 4 or 5 years old. Maybe no big deal. Well, there is a big deal because you have leveled down discrimination between the best friend and the less favorite child. So imagine the repercussion for society when discrimination are so deleterious to the quality of human relations. So what can we do from there? Where we have the possibility of individual change. How can we move to societal change? So when I was researching the book for 5 years, one of the eureka moments when I came across something that really makes everything fits together, and it's the evolution of cultures. There's a book by Richardson and Boyd that's sort of make it easy reading for all their works, which is not by gene alone. Culture change in the Darwinian process, but faster than gene. To have a more altruistic gene might take 50,000 years. Too late for the environment. But fortunately, culture can change much faster. And the model shows that if you have a group of altruistic people, of course, love to be together. They love to cooperate. So even one by one, the altruistic people opposed to the damn selfish one will be quickly eliminated. If you take a group of altruistic people who cooperate, compared to not even a group, but a collection of individualistic, selfish people who kick each other's leg all day long, that group has an advantage for prospering rather than that. So it's more complex than that, but models show that there could be certainly a possibility for altruism to spread throughout society. And if you think of what makes a trait favorable to survival, well, it is precisely that it helps you to survive. So what better trait to survival when we have maybe 9 billion people soon on Earth with all the challenges we have than having more cooperation that we do? That seems to be a very good trait for survival. So that can be done. Not only go back to the Hermitage, where that's what I see at breakfast in the morning, but we need caring economics. As I mentioned, that's the only way to take care of poverty in the midst of plenty, inequalities, and to have an economy that cares for the common good, that's the environment. We need to enhance cooperation within companies, corporations. We need to have unconditional teamwork, cooperation. Even there's some competition between companies, it's okay, but within a team, there should be unconditional sharing of information and so forth. There should be a cooperative learning in school rather than competitive. We need sustainable harmony. I love this concept, which I think is better than sustainable growth or sustainable development, because we always think of quantitative growth. Now we can have a qualitative growth, and that reflects more the notion of harmony. So for now, harmony is less inequalities. For the future, harmony is remaining within the limits of planetary boundaries, harmony with our environment. We need local commitment and global responsibility. Just like there is a WHO for health, we need global responsibility for the environment. It cannot be just national interest. We need to extend altruism to 1.3 million other species. They are not just there for entertaining us as instruments to our well-being. We kill every year 65 billion land animals, 1,000 million, that's 1 trillion sea animal for our consumption. That's very vastly morally wrong. It perpetuates poverty because it's too much resources that are devoted to production of livestock. It's the second cause of greenhouse gas effect, meat production, 14% after the buildings and before transportation. So we need to take care of that. And we need to dare altruism, because to know that it does exist, along with selfishness, of course, but we are not only selfish by far. So we can teach that in schools. We can bring that in corporations. Caring, mindfulness. Mindfulness is great, but caring mindfulness, you get 2 for the price of 1. So then, as as I'm a photographer, I always try to put my photograph somewhere. So I think that we should conclude with Martin Luther King. Every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. So I just want to conclude with an image of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, an immense heart, and say that it's not only theoretical. We have been trying to implement that, compassion in action. Now we treat 120,000 patients every year in India, Nepal, and Tibet through Karuna-Shechen, our organization. Recently in the earthquake, we have been now helping 68,000 people since 1 month in 200 villages with food, shelter, and medical help. So we have a palliative care unit in India. In Bihar, we treat 80,000 patients a year in 180 villages. In Tibet, we build 20 dispensaries. We need bridge here. This is our car. So we build 18 bridges. We have home for the elderly. This is the happiest person in the world, by the way. We found him. He's a Tibetan doctor. He has 2 pairs of glasses that are not corrected. So he's neither an ophthalmologist nor a dentist. And so we have built a number of schools. We try to educate as many girls as possible. There's a great joy to study. We also helped in the Yushu earthquake in 2010. 10,000 people lost their lives. We bought 6 trucks of goods, and we helped 3,000 people over 2 winters. This year, from last April, we started build an anti-seismic school at 14,000 feet in eastern Tibet. As I said, we have been with our clinic, which has 50 people working, and the 500 monks of our monastery in different teams. We have been helping more than 50,000 people during the earthquake in Nepal. And of course, it's so tragic. And we are going to continue in the long term to help them rebuild their life. We're going to rebuild schools, rebuild dispensary. This is our Karuna girl. I photographed her 13 years ago. And last year, it's like Steve McCurry, Afghan girl. I found my girl again. And I found her name, and she's called Beautiful Ocean of Turquoise. So thank you for your help. And please, Jim, come with me.
One of my own challenges, and maybe you can help me with this, is I think everyone in this room sort of agrees with what you say, but the opposite is that I think so many people feel overwhelmed sometimes by the suffering they see. Or in the media, of course, what sells is tragedy and pain.
Yes.
And I think we appreciate that probably population-wise, there's probably less war than has ever been. There's less suffering on some level. But a lot of people are almost paralyzed because they see so much suffering and they say, I'm only so-and-so. I can only do very little. How do I actually incorporate this to have an effect or to be beneficial to society?
Well, I don't think people think I can only do so little. I think so often they're overwhelmed, maybe because the more suffering they witness, the more they react by the impact it has on them, which is a self-centered experience of the other suffering. So I know you are a physician, of course. I know often I've seen you crying, thinking of the suffering of others. But if a surgeon on the battlefield starts crying at the first person he sees wounded, how is he going to help 100 people over 24 hours? So that's why the more there is suffering, if it's self-oriented experience, then the more you will be overwhelmed. But if it's others-oriented reaction, then what does Dalai Lama call compassionate courage? The more there is suffering, the more your courage should be 100 times more. So then it's completely different. And that's why compassionate courage is the antidote to empathic distress and despair. So in a way, the deviation of compassion is to fall in despair. So in that case, that's why the magnitude of the courage and the compassion should match the magnitude of the suffering. And in that case, only thing you might be concerned is how I can do something, and you can always do something. The idea that I'm only one person, one person can do a lot. Why not?
But for many in the West, a lot of people beat themselves up. They're not compassionate with themselves. And for many, it's difficult to overcome that because they're very hypercritical. What are your thoughts on how to deal with that, or how to be kinder?
Yes. So before answering this, I want to also, I forgot one thing about what you said before, is that it's true that just in the same way that someone will report if one of us rob a bank, we have a tendency to always report on what's extreme, deviant, potentially threatening, and so forth. And also somehow there is an attraction to extreme violent behavior, maybe because we need to pay attention when there's something like that happen. But it's been such extreme that at 20 years old, in North America and Europe, will have seen 40,000 homicides on TV and film. What does that mean? I've been in many, many countries. I've been in my hermitage, it was in the midst of the Maoist and army. I saw one day the Maoists with guns, the next day the army with guns. But I haven't seen, so far, someone been killed right in front of my eyes. I've not been in a war situation, I've not been in genocide, but I've been quite a few places. I've seen many dead people, but not someone killed in front of my eyes. Certainly not 40,000. So that makes a distortion of our perception of the world. Now, to come back to your idea of self-compassion, it's interesting that there is no such word in Tibetan. And when someone, a long time ago, was telling the Dalai Lama about self-hate, he turned to his translator, and to Jimba, and he said, he tried to say, what did they say? And then he came back and said, it's not possible. And then he said, yes, of course, it's possible. Many people suffer from that. In Europe, if you take the 15 years old to 25 years old, 15% have done automutilation or cutting or different things like that, harming themselves. It's an amazing number. So there's certainly an issue. So he thought deeply of that, and he said, well, there may be many other reasons, but what he meant by it's not possible is those people often have been denied the very possibility of happiness because of being abused or traumatized or put down with great contempt again and again, and they have this kind of image of themselves. So they can't even think of happiness because it's painful in a way. But somehow, and that's what clinicians like Paul Gilbert and Christine Neff, who work with self-compassion, have shown that if you could give them an insight that it could be, it's okay to cut yourself, but if you could be another way to relieve what you feel and feel some kind of relief, maybe it would be better, isn't it? So if you make them accept the possibility that somehow not to suffer will be a little bit better, isn't it? It's already a big step. So when I first heard of self-compassion, I felt a little bit, thought this is another stuff, going to go into narcissism. And then I was wrong, because when I then met Paul Gilbert and Christine Neff and out of the studies, and precisely self-compassion is not about boosting self-esteem to the roof, which definitely goes to narcissism. That's been shown also. But self-compassion is different. You say, well, I'm not perfect. It's okay if I fail, and I should be more gentle with myself, and I'm not the only one who suffers. And so there's many ways to just have a benevolent voice for yourself, and then try to see, well, it will not be so bad if I found a way out of this terrible situation and suffering, and I'm not the worst person in the world. And so this process, so I thought, what is the equivalent in Buddhism? And in Buddhism, we don't meditate on self-compassion, and now, though I know it's quite useful in the West when you practice compassion, like in ccare, to have this component in the beginning. because Paul Gilbert told me, it's too much asking to people who hate themselves than to compassion for others becomes overwhelming. So I thought, what's the equivalent in Buddhist practice? Since we don't have that word. So, but we have a notion that how do you generate compassion for others? First of all, you recognize that deep within, no one really wants to suffer. You don't wake up in the morning thinking, may I suffer my whole life. But,
Some may.
well, no, but, it's maybe, but really, somehow, if you could, you would choose to avoid suffering. If it was realistic for you, somehow. So then you start valuing that. So if I value that, then I will be good to myself in the sense of not putting my hand in the fires and hoping not to be burned. So I will be good to myself means stopping being addicted to the cause of suffering, basically. So in that sense, you value yourself, you start to be good with yourself in the sense of moving away from the cause of suffering and going more toward the cause of flourishing. So once this is understood, then you can transport yourself in others' mind and say, well, maybe they was as confused as I've been. Maybe they can do things that's harmful, but somehow the same way, it would be nice if they could not suffer. So then you start valuing that aspiration in others and then be concerned by them, and that's the root of altruism and compassion. So in that way, you move from that recognition in yourself and say, well, all sentient beings are basically the same, human beings, animals, no one willingly wants to suffer. So I think that's how we can relate to self-compassion, and there are very interesting studies. They show that cultivating self-compassion doesn't lead to narcissism, while boosting excessively self-esteem does, for sure.
One of the, you showed the wonderful slides of the two Japanese women, and we know that there are pockets throughout the world where we have these people who have extraordinary longevity. And even in the face of smoking and drinking and all of these activities, they still live extraordinarily long lives. And the correlation is, of course, that these are communities in which people have lived their entire lives. I think one of the challenges in modern society is that families don't stay together. You have the grandparents are one place, the children are another place, the parents are another place, the siblings are dispersed, and people go to work and they have no close relationships. I mean, there are people who have worked at a job for 10, 20 years, and the most they've said to somebody in the next cubicle is hello. And in the context of this reality, what is it, though, that can help people to make that connection? Because I think part of the problem, too, is that people have a fear of being vulnerable.
So before answering your question, I want to say, please don't give an easy escape to smokers. Because
it's horrible.
I'm very upset these days about Philip Morris suing Uruguay, UK, for trying to preserve the health of their citizens. And when we know that 6 million people every year die because of smoking. So there's no excuse for that. It's a license to kill. Anyway, now besides that, anyway, I know you didn't mean that, but better make the point. Clarify. So now, when I show those 3 kids and the two grandmothers, there have been a study of the OCDE in 36 countries of developed countries about, they proposed 10 factors that contributes to what they felt a good life or a sort of well-being, and including a lot of things like income and stuff like that. So income came about 5th. Of course it matters, especially if you're under the poverty lines, but apparently people rated only 5th. Number 1, quality of human relationship. In the workplace, at home, in society. And then all the studies corroborate that. When I show those kids holding each other, it has been shown that good quality human relationship, that means not only having many friends on Facebook, if you have, I just come from Facebook, nothing against that, I love it.
I want to talk to you about Facebook.
But if you have 6,000 likes, you don't have a conversation basically with them, you speak about you. So anyway, Okay. We can do great things for relief in Nepal. They did it. It's wonderful. So anyway, just what I want to say is the quality human relationship is something that you have people you can count of, you can seek solace, you can bring solace, you can ask for advice, and that's having a rich, social network that is positive, has been shown to increase longevity, less, of course, sicknesses, less addictions, and all kinds of good things, which is just the opposite if you find yourself alone in the midst of many. So, and alone not because you choose to go to a hermitage voluntarily and thrive there meditating, but because it's a imposed sort of isolation. And so that's a kind of a dramatic thing. So anything, and I heard that 30% of New Yorkers now live alone. And that's going to go to 40% in 10 years. So that's something there. When you know in Tibet, like extended families, they're all together, 3 generations. And the next stand, if a mother dies giving birth, the child will be immediately taken, under the support of the next family next door. So this kind of quality relations still exists. So that's a problem, and I think we should be mindful of making anything that's why the midterm of quality of life comes in. Whatever measures or policies or whatever we could do as individuals to promote quality of human relationship, it goes a great way to offer people a better life. So that's up to us to think about that. And there are many ways because there have been studies, and the problem is sometimes knowledge is not put to use by policymakers. So I think something that we should make efforts to put into practice.
Before we began speaking, we had been chatting about a study that was done that compared actually CEOs and sociopaths on this sociopath scale, and how actually there was a wonderful correlation. In our capitalist society in the United States, where we have the situation where what is necessary or what is felt to be necessary to succeed at a CEO level attracts a certain type of individual, and the very type of person that attracts is often a self-absorbed or narcissistic type of person. And we see these types of people, frankly, taking us to the economic precipice, and also a situation where we have ever greater income or wealth inequality. What do we do? I mean, how does compassion help that?
Well, at least this is a problem that has been increasingly acknowledged. Now, even in places that the World Economic Forum, that you won't think this is the ultimate charitable organization that you can think of. But the last 2 years, because I've been there now for 7 years for some weird reason, they identify that there was the civil society dinner and many of the round tables, inequalities as being the main challenges to face, to try to solve in society. So at least there's a recognition of that. And you can see our major thinkers in that field, like Joseph Stiglitz, Amartya Sen, Dennis Snower is an economist who founded the Global Economic Symposium, who now developed that concept of caring economics as a serious way. He said, the voice of reason that has been so much praised in economy is not enough. And also we know how we are not so reasonable in the end. Look at, Daniel Kahneman's book and Tversky's work. We're often so irrational in our decision. And then the idea that economists are very, not only rational, but emotion-free. There's no space for emotion. And there's a study here at Stanford showing what when they do a risky investment, it's like hell of emotion in their brain. The fight or flight areas of the brain like activated like crazy. So if you do have emotion, better have the right ones in a way. So since we know we are emotional, since we know we're not that rational, so why insisting so much on that voice of reason, which is of course desirable, but we need a voice of care along that. So that's something that is emerging, again, to say the World Economic Forum, because you could say it's one extreme, but it's not that much. Last 2 years, the first initial speech by the founder, Klaus Schwab, of course it's just words, but still words matter. He said, let's place this week under the auspices of caring and compassion. Okay. It's maybe only words, but it's not how to put back the euros and deal with the Greek crisis. So at least it is said that at the outset of this kind of meeting. So you think, well, there's something in the air that people start to realize that something has to be done in that direction. So culture don't change from one day to the next, but they do change over 5 years, 10 years. This was inconceivable 10 years ago when I first went in 2006 in the forum. No way. And now that the first day every morning start with a caring mindfulness meditation, it was inconceivable. That Rishi Davidson, Tanya Singer, John Kabat-Zinn, Daniel Goleman, and we are all there together having many roundtables. This is something that's encouraging, at least. That is something moving. I have a friend, Jeff Walker, who teaches at the Harvard Business School. You know him as well. He said 20 years ago, everybody, Wall Street, Wall Street. He said 30% of his students now, they want to use their skills to go in humanitarian world. That's, I think, some kind of encouraging sign. So that it's coming. The revolution of NGOs, there's millions of NGOs now. This is a kind of big new thing in the 20th century that happened in 20th century. And it's sort of this grassroots solidarity. So that's, I think, there are many signs that are encouraging.
It's interesting because one of the things that we're seeing, and you mentioned mindfulness at Davos, there's this idea now, and I think they call it McMindfulness. Have any of you guys heard that term? So it's a sort of watering down of this and a belief that if everyone's taught mindfulness in the corporate environment, the world's going to be a much better place. It's interesting, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about how a particular hedge fund is now requiring that every manager does mindfulness. And it was interesting in this article, there wasn't a single word about philanthropy. There wasn't a word about caring. There wasn't a word about compassion. The words were attention, focus, more money. And is the danger potentially that in some ways what we're doing is giving individuals methods to be more productive, but not be more caring?
Well, thank you for giving me exactly the good opportunity. I talked at length with John Kabat-Zinn, and he said, and rightly so, that if you do properly the MBCT or MBSR, the Stuart presence that makes me need these lapses, but that, of course, he sees people over 6 weeks that become open to others. And there's this beautiful factor of increase, opening to others, opening their heart. This was all done, of course, in the medical situation, people who have suffered a lot, whether undergoing chemotherapy or things like that. So first of all, if you have a group of people who interact over 6 weeks, who are taken care of, sort of, acknowledged, and they are together, they are bound to open to each other in some way. And if someone like John, with a great heart, does that, I'm quite sure that this will be part of the way he teaches that, and that will happen. But still, it is sort of not explicitly, unambiguously taught as a core component is happened. What happened means it's a byproduct. I mean, you expect it will happen if it's well done. But suppose it's not well done, and suppose it's not your goal, and as you said, it's just increased efficiency. So then you could have this kind of deviation. And I think you could have what? A mindful sniper. Now look at the sniper. He has to be perfectly calm, no emotions, perfectly in the present moment. If he's distracted, he has to come back, non-judgmental. He kills everybody who comes in the field of his gun. So he's mindful. Mindful psychopaths, very calm, very quiet, no emotion, of course, and then manipulating all these things. So that's why you can't have a caring sniper and a caring psychopath, full stop. So why not adding 6 words systematically all the time? So you cut through all possible deviation. And then, of course, why did I say that you have 2 for the price of 1? Because if you practice or meditate or train your mind in metta or kindness and compassion, to do so, you have to be mindful. Otherwise, you are distracted all the time and you don't cultivate anything. So therefore, it is compassion with mindfulness. It has to be with mindfulness. So but you embed it with such extraordinary human quality, and then you cannot deviate because you lose mindfulness. So you could easily have mindfulness without caring, but you can't have true caring without mindfulness. So I think why not generalizing that, and then it will cut through all possible deviations. So I'm totally in favor of caring mindfulness.
And this is the core of our compassion cultivation training, which we've developed here at Stanford in ccare by Thupten Jinpa, who was here a few weeks ago. Many of you may have been attending. That, it's interesting, I was having a conversation with Eckhart Tolle, and he gave this example of this individual who was very dedicated to his mindfulness and theoretically compassion, at least on a intellectual cognitive level. And so he spends a great deal of time meditating. And his daughter walks in the room and he goes, "God damn it, why are you interrupting my compassion meditation?" And it shows you it's not just doing it, you have to imbue it and have it spread throughout you. And that's when it's most powerful, when you actually have integrated this into everything of what you are. And that's where I think you see the most powerful effects. I think we're going to open it up to questions. And I see we immediately already have. Once you anticipated this, go ahead.
I feel a little bit uncomfortable about talking about them versus us, as if corporate world is the bad guys and we're the good ones. I don't know. I see some division, and I'm getting a feel of almost lack of compassion on our side to establishing such a black and white division. I don't know if
No, I understand. Well, I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure we meant that in any way. It's just where the conversation went. As an example, there are a number of studies that have been done now, and there are leaders in corporations who, in fact, have imbued these values completely and have integrated trust, cooperation, communication, transparency, giving meaning to employees' work. And in every one of those instances, it has had a profound impact. And certainly, I was not meaning to imply that we're not seeing these transformations, because the studies show that when that happens, both in regard to shareholder value, employee satisfaction, and profit, it has a profound, profound effect. So that does exist, and it's happening all over. Nothing is black and white, and they're not evil, and certainly academia is not evil. There are probably pockets of evil, and there are pockets of that everywhere. But I think the best thing we can do is to recognize that and maintain our vision, though, of the possibility of goodness.
Well, in my case, what I mentioned is not about corporate world in general. What I was mentioning is the possibility, because it has been happening, of proposing mindfulness as a way to simply become more focused, more efficient, and without integrating at all at the core of that the caring environment. So it happens. In France also, you have other things that are another form of deviation, which is called the 3G meditation. And it's one of the most popular if you go on the net for meditation. And it proposes you have a choice between 30 euros, 40 euros, 50 euros. And depending on what you pay, you'll have something that will make you more beautiful, more seductive, and more glowing, and all this stuff. So you cannot help but thinking that they are sort of little bit, it's not going to be useful. It's not this bad ethically or morally, but simply it's a pity that the idea of mind training that can be so wonderfully useful to help us to, first, of course, function better in life, but also make us better human beings, could be like any tool because it's nothing special with mindfulness. It's the same with intelligence. Intelligence can be used to harm or to do good. But caring cannot be basically used to do something wrong or bad or harmful unless you are just deluded. But at least the intention is not to do harm. So that's the thing. But now, if you want to give, because this was the exploring the possibility of deviation, but of course I could have so many inspiring stories in the corporate world of people who instilled trust in the working place and who decided that they will have, I know at least 2 people extremely successful, like Dieter Pohlmann, who is the biggest temporary works company in Germany. He told from the start to his people, nobody's going to check you. We are all together in this enterprise, so we are not going to check what you do, we trust you. And it worked beautifully well for 20 years. There's a guy called Ricardo Semler, which I met in Brazil. He said also, I'm going to pay you more than the market, nobody's going to check you, and you can actually determine your salary and how much holiday you want to take. But remember, we are 200 people in this boat, and if you are unreasonable, nothing going to work. People thought he was crazy, and it worked beautifully well, and he was very successful. He multiplied that. He could have been a billionaire, but he decided as things were going to invest in schools and something like that. So when he was talking about the notion of giving back to society, he said, well, if you have to give back to society, it may be that you took too much in the first place. So anyway, there's hundreds of stories like that of people who instilled an atmosphere of trust, of cooperation, of humanity, put compassion at the heart of their mission, who have a social business component, like where I was yesterday. Oh yes, at LinkedIn. They give 40 hours, paid 40 hours every year for their employees to do something pro-social or things like that. So that's something encouraging, and there's many examples like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, we were talking about how there's a tendency to focus on sort of the negative, and maybe that's where we were going there. But, in some ways, this is an extraordinary time, and there are extraordinarily wonderful things happening. And we all have to remember that, I think, and not get lost in Fox News. Oh, I didn't say that. Go ahead. Go ahead. Boy, this young lady, she's like an athlete. She's like...
I believe Dalai Lama has announced that he might be the last Dalai Lama. And I was wondering if you could give us some more background behind this decision or potential decision. Is that because it would be difficult to find another Dalai Lama with the presence of China in Tibet, or are there other reasons?
Well, I don't know if it's the right place to speak about that, but last year when I was in sort of retreat and there was full of the newspaper, and I thought, then this French radio started to call me and things like that. I was not quite completely in retreat, fortunately. And then they said, so I thought, what's going on? So I called the Dalai Lama's entourage. I said, no, of course, nothing has changed. It's the same thing. And last week I had to spend a whole morning with the French strategic cell of the foreign department to clarify that. Dalai Lama never said anything else that whether there should be a next Dalai Lama or not, it's up to the Tibetan people, full stop. He said if they don't want a Dalai Lama, that's fine. It's just an institution. It didn't exist before the 14th century. It's not a big deal. And so whether they want it or not, in the same way as before, it's up to them. And he said maybe if he's the last, maybe not too bad. It's not the worst of all of them. And it's better to end like that than to have a stupid Dalai Lama chosen by a totalitarian country. But he never said that I will be for sure the last one. He even said if the circumstances are such that a woman will be more helpful to society, not only I will, but I should be a woman Dalai Lama. So he has never said I will be the last one. He said one thing, he will not be, if he's the Dalai Lama, that's his business, he said, to be reborn where he wants. Therefore, he won't be reborn in a country with lack of freedom.
Hi.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I really like the idea of the caring economy, but what I want to know is that for example, economists love mathematical principles. So can you elucidate on some of the principles of a caring economy. For example, in classical economy, we make the assumption that every agent is self-interest, right? Is completely rational, and in a corporate perspective, we say that the CEO is only responsible. Whole responsibility is only to the shareholders, right?
Sure.
So how do we formulate the principles of a caring economy so that things can work?
So the economy you refer to, like one of the founders, Francis Edwards, said, there is no place for altruism in the economic system. Okay? And then you know, of course, of the invisible hand of Adam Smith. But sometimes we forgot that Adam Smith also wrote the theory of moral sentiment, where he said if a community doesn't enact cooperation and benevolence, it will collapse. And then the whole point is being rational. We know now that this is not the case. And we know that this so-called, that system could only work if there's a free flow of information. That's one of the conditions. There's no free flow of information, obviously. So, as Joseph Stiglitz said, the main quality of the invisible hand is that it doesn't exist. And on top of that, if you have an invisible hand of a blind, selfish person, that's not going to go bode well for society. So, since Denis Noah has been trying to articulate that is simply to have the voice of care means you have some consideration for others' interest. And it's not that you sacrifice everything for others, but at least it's part of what your activities and your thinking and your attitude takes others' interest in consideration. The idea that by simply everyone maximizing their personal interest, everything will fall into place, it just never happens, doesn't seem to be true. It's a very reductionist view of human nature to suppose that humans are defined by the definition of Homo economicus. It's a very reductionist, it's almost a caricature. So this is not the case, and since there's two particular points which are sort of burning challenges today, the increase of inequalities, the poverty in the midst of plenty, the Homo economicus will never solve that issue. There's no reason to do so. And then the common goods, there's no reason to solve that. So then we need the voice of caring. So that's why the point made by people like Denis Noah and others.
Next question. How about this gentleman?
Is it possible for us to get a little taste of compassion training? And while it's that, what's the difference between compassion training and loving kindness training?
Well, if you like. So, definitions matter to some extent, but they are useful. So altruism is defined as a motivation and an intention. It's a state of mind. It's not just an action. Of course, an action could be beneficial to someone, but still motivated by self-interest. You could shower someone with presents and nice words with the only idea is to somehow cheat that person or do something like that. So altruism is when you have a thought, it doesn't mean you are all the time altruistic in every of your thought, but at some point, there's a thought that is meant to benefit others. The ultimate goal is that, full stop. That's altruistic. Now, normally you should be able to put that in action, but if circumstances does not allow that, still the intention was altruistic. If circumstances allow it, then you will do it. If not, then it's an altruistic intention that could not be translated in action. Now, this kind of benevolence will meet. So it's just in general, make people be happy and find the cause of happiness, benevolence. Now, when that meets suffering, it's just a different name. We call compassion the sort of shape that altruism takes in facing suffering. It is the wish that may be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So it's more self-suffering oriented. What maybe catalyzes the switch is empathy. So empathy tells you that person is suffering. Now I recognize it either through emotional resonance or through perspective taking, cognitive empathy. In both cases, I know that this person is suffering, so my altruism becomes compassion. So how to cultivate? Well, we do have moments, everyone has moments of unconditional love for somebody. a child, a loved one, even sometimes a small animal. So you have those moments or you only wish good for that person. But then, it goes away. 15 seconds later, something else happens, or you do something, and then you move to something else in your mind. But, to play the piano, it's not enough to tap on the piano 15 seconds, every week. You have to have some kind of repetition and training and familiarization and cultivation. So we're not used as much as we are used to spend time for learning different skills, mathematics, chess, anything. But somehow we are not so much used to the idea that we have a potential for all those basic human qualities like compassion and loving kindness. But why should they be at the optimal point from the start? That would be very counterintuitive for everything else we know about skills. So we may have different levels of predisposition to that. Some people have a very good heart from the start, some a little bit less. But each of those have a potential for change because every skill can be modulated with training. So the whole point is to familiarize yourself. That means those moments where your mind is filled with loving kindness for an innocent child like the one I showed on the photograph, instead of 15 seconds, you nurture that, filling your mental landscape for 5, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. And when it sort of disappears, you bring it back. If it lost its vividness, you revive it. If you're distracted, you come back to it. That's a process of familiarization. So there's nothing mysterious about that kind of meditation or mind training. You just have to do it. And it's so simple. Really simple.
And it's free.
Yes.
You don't have to pay 20, 30, 40 euros for that. Actually, well, go ahead.
Thank you. So I just would like to thank so much for your amazing work because I'm a teacher here at Stanford for the last 20 years. I'm teaching documentary filmmaking focusing on human rights issues, and we founded 18 years ago United Nations Association Film Festival, and we screened last year film about your work. So your work and your vision put together academia, Stanford, Palo Alto, what we are talking about, the companies, people came to see your film, and also the most importantly, people from East Palo Alto, which is the poorest place in our area. So all these people came together to see the film about your work and then talked about you. So I think education and knowledge that you're bringing is enriching our community, and this is probably the best value for us. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I don't know what to say.
We've unfortunately run out of time for questions. I just want to say a few things. The humanitarian work that Matthieu does is in Nepal, northern India, and Tibet. And the organization is called Karuna-Shechen. It's one that I support because it's very important work. All the royalties from his books goes to support that work. Matthieu, I know, lives a very, very humble life. And obviously, we've had tragedy in that area of the world. So if you would consider supporting that work, supporting those who are suffering in that area, or supporting anyone who is suffering. Matthieu's going to be back there. You can sign up to their organization to get emails about the incredible work that Karuna-Shechen is doing. Matthieu has kindly agreed to sign books. If you would like to purchase some books, we have a number out there. And again, thank you so much for being here and being who you are. Thank you.
Thank you. One small thing I want to say about our intervention in Nepal is, of course, the emergency work is what we are carrying now. But the lights of the news will soon be focused on some other tragedies in the world. Some big organization that came will leave, like it was the case in Pakistan after the earthquake. And then, people have to fend for themselves. So we are sort of always there since 15 years. We'll be there again. And our goal is to, after the emergency, to continue over 1 or 2 years to help people rebuild their life, community projects, rebuilding schools and stuff. So it may not be in the news anymore, but will continue, and that's why also it will be increasingly difficult in a way to attract the solidarity on this particular area of the world, but we have to continue that work. So any support will be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you again.